Hey guys, welcome back to X-Man Games. So last time I spoke about 5 things that Uncharted 4 got right, so I'll leave the link for that down in the description below if you want to check that out. But today I'll be talking about 5 things it got wrong, and there's really not a lot of things it got wrong, so this was a really tough list to make. But first, if you guys haven't already, please be sure to hit that subscribe button if you want to see more content like this. And once again, a big thank you to my friend Henry for helping me make this list. And as always, a huge thank you to all my subscribers and to everyone who watches these videos. You're all amazing, and it really helps this channel grow. With that all said, let's get into it. So the first thing up on this list is the post-game, or the lack of it. If I was to play a game like GTA 5 and completed the main story, well, there'd still be loads for me to do, like side missions, collectibles, and just free roaming around the world. Well, unfortunately, Uncharted 4 doesn't really have any of that, as it's quite a linear experience, which certainly isn't a bad thing at all, but the problem is that compared to a game like GTA 5, it has very little to do after the story. And while I understand there's only so much they can justify cramming into a linear experience such as this, I just think something would have been else would have been good, to really add to it. You can replay the story or just choose a certain action encounter, which is a nice touch, just choosing the certain bits where there's a lot of gunfighting or where there's a bit of climbing. It's a nice touch, as I say, but apart from the odd collectible, the only real thing to do after the story is the quite lackluster multiplayer. I've really not played too much of the multiplayer, but apparently from what I've heard it's quite mediocre. There's really not much to differ from other forms of multiplayer in other games. So yeah, it would have been really nice to have, see something extra to do after the story, or to do something extra after the story, should I say. Because as soon as I finish playing the story, I don't really go back and revisit it much. So just something extra to fill that gap would have been greatly appreciated here. So the next thing up on this list is something that I'll probably get a bit of criticism for, but that is the lack of locations. Now, last time I talked about how good and full of intricate details the levels were in this game, but the problem for me is the real lack of locations, and on occasion a lack of variety. For the first half of the game, we visit multiple locations like Scotland, Italy, and Madagascar, which are all very contrasting in different environments, which gives huge variety. But for some reason, about halfway through of this game, there's a real lack of environment diversity for me. Like in the whole second half of the story, you spend all your time on the same island, and this means you're just sort of repeating the same environment over and over. You spend a good chunk of that time in the same forest as well, so the environments are gorgeous and brimming with intricate details, I'd say. There's just such a lack of diversity, especially in this latter part of the game. It just feels very repetitive, along with the gameplay, as that doesn't really change much either. So the last few chapters can often feel a bit of a drag, as you're just going through the same jungle/forest over and over and over again. It just doesn't differ, and unfortunately that kind of kills the experience for me, because you're doing one chapter and one encounter, and it feels fun, and then it's the same thing the second time, a third time, and after a while you sort of just get bored and tend to switch off, and that's a problem for me. But the third problem for me is the use of artificial game lengtheners. Now that's a bit of a mouthful, so I'll shorten it to AGLs. Now, for anyone that doesn't know what these are, they're essentially ways to extend the runtime of the story and in the game. And an example of this could be a cutscene or an animation, and this game does use this quite a bit, especially with the amount of unnecessary and irrelevant parts of the story. This is called story padding for those of you who don't know. This is just a part of the story which does not affect the plot in any way if it was removed. So it doesn't benefit the plot in any way, it doesn't add to it, it's just unnecessary information or unnecessary like flashbacks, for example, that just mean nothing and don't contribute anything to the plot. It's merely used, as I say, just to extend the runtime of the narrative, really, and to, I suppose, get your money's worth. There is one time where it's used with a flashback, about halfway through the game again, and I'm not sure if it's the way it's written, but it almost feels tacked on, purely for the purpose of extending game time again. Now, while the flashback itself isn't bad, it doesn't quite connect with the rest of the story, especially the bit after. It just sort of seems stuck on there, as if it's just to tie loose ends that no one was really that bothered about. And I just think it's these sort of events that don't really need to be here. And I think their only real purpose is to extend the plot. I think the story and the characters I mentioned in the previous video is fantastic. Naughty Dog did a fantastic job. But these just unnecessary tacked on pieces of nothingness, really. Unnecessary bits of information, tying up loose ends, as is the 4th game in the franchise now. It's just a lazy way for writers to not have to justify a 5th game. They wanted to wrap it up with this game, and it just comes across as a bit unnecessary for me. So the fourth thing on this list is the general pacing of the game, and while in terms of the story it's quite good, elsewhere, not so much. A lot of similar puzzles are repeated over and over, and are usually not very fun, and the game, without spoiling it for anyone who's not played it yet, likes to set you up thinking that you found the ultimate treasure, but often it just leads to nothing, and after the third time of this happening, it just gets a little bit repetitive and annoying. It's sort of like, oh great, more of the same thing, and whilst knowing that you most likely won't complete that main objective and it will all inevitably be delayed again, I think this sort of ties with the artificial game lengtheners again, and sometimes it just gets to the point where you sort of just get bored of it. You just get bored of the repetition, and you just end up turning the game off, which is a huge shame, because you can tell the developers and the writers and all that really poured their hearts and soul into this. But that being said, the gameplay, although sometimes repetitive, is almost pretty much always very fun here, and I suppose there's still that motivation and reason to carry on. So while this is not the biggest deal, it's still a little bit of a niggle for me, and it just kind of ruins the flow for me. I think that's the ultimate thing here. While generally in the first half of the story, it's the flow is quite nice. It's these game lengtheners and the padding, and that comes onto this fourth point of the general pacing. It just feels a bit off for me. So the third and fourth point, they're definitely tied together. So the final thing up on this list is not something that the game did wrong per se, it's something that it just didn't have that it needed, and that's an upgrade system. And there's just a pure absence of it here, which isn't always a bad thing, but when you have a game that is quite long and linear, then it becomes a bit of a serious issue here. While you're generally quite immersed in the amazing narrative and gameplay, there really isn't much of a progression system here. And if we compare it to something like Tomb Raider, which a lot of people compare this game to, where we can constantly upgrade all your weapons all the time, and the character skills, there's so much going up in there, it really seems like a bit of a problem with Uncharted 4 not having that. It's, it seems like a basic gameplay mechanic to have upgrade systems. We've had it for years now. So it seems like a bit of a problem when this simple gameplay mechanic is not included. Which, again, I think is a bit of a shame, as I think they poured their heart and souls into this, and this game has so much to offer the player, but I feel with a lack of improvement and progression, ultimately it makes the gameplay feel really repetitive again. And that's what it boils down to, is how repetitive does this game get? As you just use the same equipment over and over again, the same weapons. I just think any sort of upgrade system, even if this was basic or just the odd one or two things, it would have been greatly appreciated by the fans of this game and the fans of this franchise. It would have gone a long way, and I think Naughty Dog probably should have done that. So, there were my picks of 5 things Uncharted 4 got wrong. Be sure to comment yours down below. I'll of course be doing more videos like this at some point, and I'm thinking maybe some PS3 games like Red Dead Redemption. That would be quite good to do a right and wrong on, as I could go into so much more detail than this, and of course, it would be really great if you guys could suggest some more games for me to do a right and wrong on. And if you haven't already, please be sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons. That would be greatly appreciated. But anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.